Hello everyone, welcome back to the vlog. This is lucky number 13. You know the drill. For this one I'm back playing more 2-5, no limit hold'em at the Bellagio. These hands were recorded on January 14th, 2023. Before I get into those hands, a couple quick announcements. First, sadly, the owner of the Angels has decided not to sell the team, so I guess I have to postpone my dream of owning the Angels a little bit longer. But that does give me more time to save up a little cash and for you guys to continue donating however many millions you have to me so that we can maybe make a successful bid next time he decides to sell the team. And related to the poker itself, if you've been watching the vlog, I've made some bluffs that didn't really work too well. I thought they made sense at the time. My opponents did not agree. So when I set out to play on this night, I specifically thought to myself that I was not going to be trying to do too many big bluffs in this one, preferably none at all, and we'll see how that went. But without further ado, let's get into the hands for this one. I once again buy in for the $500 table max at Bellagio. After a little bit, I have Ace-King offsuit in the big blind. The low jack raises to 20, and I 3-bet to 80 here. That might be a bit big, but if he wants to call 60 more to see a flop, that's fine with me. Otherwise, I'll just take down the 20, but he ends up folding this one. In this hand, I have King-9 of hearts in the small blind. We are playing six-handed. The hijack raises to 15, the button calls, and I like King-9 of hearts well enough. I will call 15, and so I do. The flop is 8 of hearts, 3 of spades, jack of hearts, so I flop an over, a flush draw, and a backdoor straight draw. It gets checked to the hijack who bets 20, the button folds, and I call. The turn is the queen of spades, which furthers my backdoor straight draw. We both check. The river is the jack of clubs, and I probably should just check here, but his bet on the flop seems like it could just be a continuation bet, especially followed by a check on the turn. So I lead out for 50 with king high. He calls with king jack, so he has 3 jacks, and I lose. And when I said no bluffing earlier, what I meant was no check raises or big raise bluffs on a river. Stabbing at a pot, that doesn't really count as a bluff, right? Here I have Ace-3 of hearts in the +1. Before we get into this hand, you may have noticed the Bellagio has new cards. They just got these. They're Faded Spade. I'm curious what you think about these ones. I think they might be good for the vlog because the symbols on the cards are bigger, so I think it might help you be able to see my cards better when watching the vlog. The cards themselves I'm not a huge fan of. They feel kind of like thick cardboard and they bend easy and kind of hold a bend shape as opposed to the old cards which were a little more malleable. Anyway, let me know what you think about these cards. And in this game, there actually was a guy to my left who talked about these cards, complaining about them for about 45 minutes straight. I don't know that I hate them that badly, but let me know what you think, at least for vlog watching, and if you've ever played with these cards, let me know whether you like the Faded Spade cards or do not like the Faded Spade cards. I'm just curious. Back to this one. So I have Ace-3 of hearts in the +1. I raise to 20, the cutoff and the big blind call. The flop is Queen of diamonds, 10 of clubs, 6 of clubs, so that's a pretty big whiff for me. It gets checked to me. I continuation bet for 35 and only the cutoff calls. The turn is the 8 of spades. I bet 60 here with nothing. Sometimes people will call your c-bet on a flop and then fold on a turn if they have second or third pair, but I don't think it's a good board to be doing that. There's a lot of straight draws and flush draws, and with the queen and the 10 being there, there's also just the possibility that someone has one of those pairs that doesn't want to fold. So even though I think my range is in there, I still think this is a bad bet, but I do bet 60 and the cutoff calls again. The river is the 3 of clubs, which gives me some showdown value, but it does put on a third club as well as this board, which is just very bad for me. I like to stubbornly continue betting, but once I got called twice and the river gives a third club, even I can check here, which I do, especially with making a pair. The cutoff bets 220 The pot has about 245, so it's a pretty close to a pot-sized bet. The only thing I beat is a missed straight draw, and I don't think that this guy has that. I can fold this one, and I do pretty easily. Despite my super excellent play so far, I'm still down a couple hundred, so I add on 200 more. Shortly thereafter, I have one of my favorite hands, pocket fours, and the small blind. The button raises to 15, and I call. The flop is 5, 7, 8 rainbow. That seems like a pretty good flop for pocket fours. We both check. The turn is the 7 of hearts. I think I probably actually just have the best hand. I also have, of course, a gut shot straight draw to go with it. I bet 15, and he folds. This is not a super exciting hand, but I just can't help but show you the power of pocket fours. This game doesn't seem super great, and I haven't been getting dealt very great cards other than the pocket fours. So I put in for a table change, and while I'm waiting for my table change, I get dealt pocket aces in the big blind. The cutoff raises to 15. I 3-bet to 50, and he folds. Further proof that it's time to move games. Can't even get someone to call the 3-bet for 35 more. I keep playing while I'm waiting for my table change, and just from missing some flops and normal game flow, I'm down some more money, so I add on another 200, putting me in for a total of 900. On this hand, I get dealt pocket kings on the button. The under the gun player limps, the cutoff limps, I raise to 30, and this time they both call. The flop is jack of hearts, 2 of spades, 6 of spades. It gets checked to me, and I'm definitely betting that. I bet 50, and they both fold. Still thinking it's a good time to table change when it's available. Shortly after that hand, my table change is available, and interestingly enough, the person who I'm switching with is going to my game, so we are just switching seats, me and this other player. And I can tell pretty much immediately that this new game is substantially better than my other game, at least for the way I like to play poker. So I guess you just never know what people are looking for. The guy who wanted to leave clearly didn't like this game, but my mood is starting to improve because I can tell this is going to be a much better game. I've only been here a couple hands, and I get dealt King 10 offsuit in the +1. If you're playing a bigger game or in a game with a lot of aggressive players, this is probably just a fold in the +1, but if you're playing a pretty passive game, I like to see flops with this hand, and I'm not too worried about being in bad position with it. But again, that's totally different. If I'm in an aggressive game with lots of raises, I would just fold this. But here, under the gun limps, I also limp, and the small blind and the big blind call. The flop is 8 of diamonds, 8 of spades, king of clubs. So I flop a nice top pair hand here. It's very possible someone could have an 8 here because there's 2 blinds and probably not the under the gun limper, but you never know. Gets checked to me. I bet 20, and only the under the gun player calls. The turn is the queen of clubs, and when he checks to me here, I feel like there's not really a great reason to bet this card. Even though I think my king is probably good, I just don't see a great reason to bet the queen of clubs. So we both check. The river is the 10 of spades, giving me a better 2 pair than any other king other than king-queen. He bets 30, and even though I feel pretty confident I have the best hand here, I just don't think this is a spot where I can raise. There are a lot of hands that do beat me, and really anything worse probably can't call. I guess maybe something like king-jack could call, or king 9, something like that, but it's a pretty small range of hands that can call me. Maybe a queen calls me if they think I'm bluffing, but the pot's not that big. I just don't think anyone's going to hero call my 2 pair with a worse hand in this situation, so I just call. He says he has ace high, and I show my 2 pair, and I win. The very next hand, I'm under the gun with 10 jack offsuit. I actually think I like this hand in this kind of a position better than king 10, just because there's more sneaky hands you can make, but maybe that's just me. I limp, the hijack limps, and the small blind and big blind call again. So far liking the amount of calls and passivity of this table. The flop is king of diamonds, 6 of diamonds, 9 of clubs, so I flop a gut shot straight draw, and it gets checked around. The turn is a good one. It's the queen of clubs giving me the straight. The big blind bets 15. The board is 2-tone, so there's 2 diamonds and 2 clubs out there and a lot of straight draws. So I raised to 45 right here. I don't want to mess around and give people free draws. Only the big blind calls. The same player from last hand. The river is the 8 of clubs, which does bring in the backdoor flush draw. He checks to me. I'm not going to check a strong hand like my straight here, just worried about a backdoor club draw. There's a lot of hands that can call me for value that I'm just crushing here. I bet 75 for value, and he calls, and I tell him I have a straight and show it, and it is good. A little while later, I'm in the +1 with pocket fours again. How lucky can one guy be? Under the gun player raises to 20. I call, as does the hijack and the big blind. The flop is 3 of diamonds, 5 of clubs, 6 of clubs, which is a pretty great flop for pocket fours. I'm open-ended, and the odds of someone else having a 4 to try to pull a straight seem pretty unlikely, and it just seems like pocket fours are probably the best hand on a flop of 3, 5, 6, of course, unless I'm behind a overpair. The under the gun player bets 35. I happily call, and everyone else folds. The turn is the 5 of spades, so if I was ahead on the flop, I'm ahead on the turn. He bets 50, and I feel like this is a good spot to raise. I feel like my 4s can very likely be the best hand, and I also feel like if I'm not ahead somehow, like he has 8s or 9s, something like that, I do still have a bunch of draws to the straight. So I raised to 130, expecting him to probably fold, and I'm okay with that. I don't really want to see another card if I'm ahead. But he thinks for a little while, and he calls. So maybe 4s aren't the best hand. Or maybe he's on some sort of straight draw or flush draw. The river is a pretty good one. It's the 2 of spades, giving me the straight and not putting a flush on the board. I'm still behind some full houses, of course. He could have raised under the gun pre-flop with pocket 3s or pocket 6s or pocket 5s, but it seems pretty unlikely to me that he has one of those hands. He checks the river to me, and I'm trying to figure out the right amount to bet that can get a call. I decide to bet 230, which is a pretty big bet, but not huge. He tanks for a while and he folds, so I think he most likely had an overpair and just can't call a $230 bet on the river, but the world may never know. Once again, pocket 4s for the win. It just seems unfair. They might as well be pocket jokers. Here I have ace-king offsuit in the big blind. The +1 player limps. The hijack raises to 20. The cutoff calls 20. I definitely think a 3-bet's in order. Question as to how much. I make it 80. I think that's about the right amount when you have a limper and a raise and a call. Feels about right to me, and only the cutoff calls my raise. The flop is jack of hearts, queen of hearts, 2 of spades, so that's pretty bad for my actual hand, but seems pretty good for my range. I could have any of those sets, ace, queen, things like that. I definitely think a c-bet's in order. I lead for 140 with the gut shot and 2 overs, and if I'm called, I'll probably shut down on the turn and see what happens, but luckily I don't have to worry about that. He folds here pretty quickly, and I win this one. This one's pretty interesting, I think. I have pocket 10s in the cutoff. The +1 player limps, the low jack limps, the hijack raises to 25, and I definitely think I should be 3-betting here, and I usually do, but for some reason I did not do that this time. I just called. I think that's a pretty big mistake. The button raises to 90, and the hijack and I both call. I think a 3-bet should have been done here, but I don't love 4-betting or shoving. I don't like 10s that much, and especially in 2-5 games, you're just not getting people who are getting way out of line, even with 3-bets very often, let alone 4 or 5 bets. So once the 3-bet comes in behind, I think call is appropriate, but I also think I should have been the one to do the 3-betting here, but I didn't. The flop is ace of hearts, 2 of clubs, 2 of diamonds, and I don't love that flop. I feel like with 2 other people in and this much pre-flop action, the odds are pretty high that one of them has something like ace-king or ace-queen, although of course that's not always a certainty, and it gets checked around, which is odd to me, and at this point I'm thinking the button who pre-flop raised to 90 probably has something very strong like ace-king or pocket aces and is just checking back this flop for deception on how strong his hand is, especially after 3-betting pre-flop, so I'm pretty suspicious when he checks back here on the flop. The turn is the 8 of diamonds. The under the gun player leads for 85, and again, I just don't love where I'm at. I feel like the under the gun player could have just smooth called a raise to 90 with something like ace king or ace queen. It's probably not going to 4-bet that hand pre-flop, although people do. So he could have very easily checked this flop to try to induce a bet from the button, who maybe doesn't have an ace. So when he leads for 85, I feel pretty confident that he has an ace, or the button has an ace, or maybe even both of them. So I don't love where I'm at with tens, and with another guy behind me on the button, who is the pre-flop raiser, I just don't think I can really do anything here. So I kind of sadly fold my tens, and I just feel like it's very suspicious the way this hand's been played. I don't see how tens can be good here. Even if someone doesn't have an ace, it seems like they've got to have queens or kings, and unless I can bluff someone off those hands, which is possible if they don't have an ace, with 2 other people in, I don't think it's worth a shot here. So I begrudgingly fold. After I fold, the button shoves for about 300 more. So now I feel very good about my fold, and like the guy probably has aces like I thought he did. That just feels like an aces kind of move to me. Although maybe you just call with aces. There's no reason to shove there. But ace king could shove there. That would make sense. The under the gun player thinks for a long time and eventually folds. And the button shows after the under the gun player folds. He shoved all in with pocket sixes. So that's a pretty strange way to play sixes. If you're going to 3-bet those pre-flop and try to represent having a huge hand, I don't know how you don't continuation bet on the flop with an ace. That's very strange to me, especially if you're going to shove with them and you're going to play them aggressively, because if the under the gun player did have ace king or ace queen, he would have played it exactly the same way. He would call the 3-bet pre-flop, he'd hit an ace and check it to the 3-better, hoping to induce a bet, and then when that didn't come, he'd bet the turn. So it seems very likely to me under the gun has something like ace king or ace queen, until he folds, of course, but the way the hand plays before that, exactly the way that you would play ace king or ace queen from that position, I think. Very interesting way to play this hand all around. The under the gun player later told me that he had pocket nines. So pocket tens would have been the best hand here, but I don't know how I'm supposed to figure that out with 2 other people in and the pre-flop and post-flop action. Based on what I'm told and shown, it looks like tens were the best hand. I still think I'm supposed to fold on that turn to a lead by the under the gun player with a button behind me who 3-bet pre-flop. In this hand, I'm in the hijack with 3-6 of spades. The under the gun player raises to 20. The low jack calls 20. This should be a pretty easy fold, I think, but the table's pretty good. Sometimes when the table gets good, my range gets a little bit too open, and this is one of those times. I call, but the table obliges, and the cutoff calls, the small blind calls, and the big blind calls, so we're 6 ways to a flop, which is the 3 of diamonds, 9 of hearts, queen of spades, so I flop bottom pair, backdoor spade draw, nothing too exciting here, but it gets checked around. So I'm pretty happy about that. The turn is none of the cards that can help me. It pairs the board, queen of clubs. The hand gets pretty interesting right about now. The under the gun player bets 20. The low jack calls 20. I feel like it's very possible nobody has a queen here. There's a lot of people in the hand, so of course the odds of there being a queen go way up, but most of these players have been playing pretty straight up, except for the guy with the 6s in the last hand, and I feel like a queen probably would have bet the flop with these players, especially with so many people in. I don't think a queen's probably checking that flop. So I raise to 100 here to represent that queen, and to see if people who don't have a queen are willing to fold. The cutoff folds, and you can see my game is good because the under the gun player who bet 20 is trying to call my raise before it even gets past the small blind. And while this is clearly annoying while you're playing poker, this guy can't call my raise fast enough. So the small blind folds also, and the big blind, not content to call my raise, 3-bets to 250. You would think now the under the gun player probably either has to re-raise or fold. You can't really just flat a 250 here from an original bet of 20. But you'd be wrong. He happily calls 250 despite a raise and a re-raise behind. So, like I said, much better game. The low jack ends up going all in for, I think, about 200, less than the 250. And everyone else, including me, folds. I really can't fold this hand fast enough. Clearly, I have learned what I needed to know. Someone's probably got a queen. Someone could have something else that's pretty good. Full house of some sort. But clearly, I'm not winning this hand, so snap fold for me. The river is the 6 of clubs, which would have given me 3 pair, and despite my continuing lobbying for 3 pair being a hand, it just hasn't gotten very far yet, although I think it's supposed to be in committee this session, so maybe it'll get out of committee. I don't know. I'm hopeful, and I think 3 pair should be a real hand. Anyway, both players checked this river. The big blind has queen 4, which makes sense as to why he might not bet a queen on the flop, with 5 people behind him with a very bad kicker, so that makes sense. The under the gun player has 10 jack, so he was very happy not only to call a raise, but a re-raise, open-ended on a paired board. I guess to his credit, if he would have hit a straight, he would have beat queen 4. And the low jack player, who was all in for less, had pocket 9s. So he flopped a set and turned the boat. And yeah, he wins that, and the queen 4 wins the side pot. But you can see this game is much better than the prior game based on the action of this hand. Here I have pocket 9s in the big blind with a straddle on to 10. It gets folded to the small blind, who raises to 30. Here I do 3-bet to 80, and everybody folds, but see, I usually 3-bet 9s and 10s. In this one I have pocket queens on the button. The +1 player limps. The cutoff raises to 20. I 3-bet to 75. The small blind calls, and everybody else folds. The flop is 6 of diamonds, 9 of spades, 4 of clubs, and that seems like a pretty great flop for queens. He checks to me, I bet 100, and he folds. Here I have pocket aces under the gun. I raise to 20, and the cutoff calls, the button calls, the small blind calls, and I'm starting to feel pretty miserable about it until the big blind shoves all in for 157. I feel like that's enough. I can just smooth call here. I don't expect to get calls behind, and if someone wants to call or shove after me, that's fine too. So I just call 157, and everyone behind does fold. The flop is 5 of clubs, 5 of diamonds, 3 of diamonds. That seems pretty great. The turn is the 2 of hearts. That also seems pretty good. And the river is the 6 of clubs, which is pretty good. I don't think everyone else loves pocket 4s as much as me, so I'm not too worried about that here. He shows pocket kings for the cooler, and I win this one. Aces against kings, it always feels a lot better when it goes this way. In this hand, I have ace-queen offsuit on the button. We are down to 4-handed at this table, which I normally don't like. I would ask for them to combine tables because there are other games going, but I do like the 3 guys I'm playing with. So I feel like I could play 4-handed with these guys, and it would be a profitable endeavor for me. We play a few hands this way until other people and the floor ask us to combine tables, and I agree to that as well. But 4-handed on this one, I'm on the button. I raise to 20, and only the small blind calls. The flop is ace of spades, 5 of spades, 8 of spades, and I have the queen of spades. So that's a pretty great flop. I have top pair and the second nut spade draw. He checks, and I feel like checking back is good here. There's not a ton of cards I'm going to hate on the turn, so I'm happy to disguise the strength of my hand. The turn is the 9 of spades, giving me the second nuts, and I'm not too worried about him having the king of spades. He could. That'd be a pretty sick cooler, 4-handed and heads up pre-flop, but you never know. He bets 20, and I just call. The river is the 3 of diamonds. That should change nothing. In fact, it cannot change anything. He leads for 35, and here I raise to 100. I'm hoping he has something like the 10 of spades or the jack of spades, and he can call. He thinks for a while, and he folds. He tells me later he actually folded the jack of spades, which I think is a pretty good fold here, if true. Four-handed, there's only 2 spades that beat him. I do call a turn bet and raise a river bet, so I'm representing the queen or the king of spades, but I still think it's a pretty tough fold when you're heads up pre-flop and playing four-handed. Pretty shortly after that last hand, we end up combining games with another table, and that game also looks pretty good. There's a lot of big stacks, but there's a lot of action and a lot of big bets and raises on flops and turns, so I'm looking to try to get involved and catch something against these guys who seem to be pushing chips kind of with reckless abandon. Which leads me into this hand in which I have Queen 6 suited in the +1. The under the gun player limps. This should be a fold. I'm not defending playing Queen 6 suited in the +1 position, other than, like I said, the game's very good, so I open my range up a little bit here on Queen 6 suited, and yeah, you probably shouldn't do that. Cutoff raises to 20, and both the under the gun limper and I call. The flop is Queen of diamonds, 6 of hearts, 5 of clubs, and that's about as good as you can hope for without flopping a flush. The under the gun player checks, I check, and the cutoff bets 30. The under the gun player calls 30, and while this is a great flop for my hand, it's not such a strong hand that I just want to call here and see a lot of extra cards. So I think right now is the time to raise. I raise to 100. Both these guys seem fairly interested, and people are overplaying hands a lot, so I feel pretty confident I'm going to get at least one call here with the raise, and that's what I want. The cutoff thinks for a while and kind of angrily folds, and then the under the gun player, that's the same guy who had kings against my aces at the other table, he shoves all in for only about 40 more, so 140 total, so I obviously snap call that. He says, "Don't do it to me again," and I tell him that the flop hit me pretty hard. The turn is another queen, making me feel very confident that my hand is the best hand. I mean, if Queen 6 was good on the flop, the extra queen probably isn't going to make any difference, but it is nice to have the nuts at this point in time. I let him know that's a great card for me also. He says, "Oh no," even before I say anything, and I tell him, "Yeah, I have a full house." And he shows me pocket kings again. The river is a card that is not a king, and I bust this guy again. It's pretty bad luck for him, but he played kings pretty badly here, and trust me, I play enough hands badly to know when a hand is played badly, and this guy, clearly a recreational player, and just can't limp call a raise with kings under the gun. So if he wants to limp under the gun and then 3-bet if there's a raise, I don't usually play kings or aces that way, but I can at least understand it. I think he definitely missed an opportunity to 3-bet kings. Obviously, hindsight's 20/20. If he raises, I quickly fold my Queen 6. I'm probably not supposed to be in for 5 or 20. Definitely not calling a 3-bet with them. So he would have ended up winning this hand, I'm sure, but again, that's hindsight, but I still you don't really want to let people in cheaply with kings. If someone snaps you off with some nonsense like Queen 6 suited with kings, you at least have to make them make bad calls for it by raising, and he never did that. So I end up winning this one, and I'm still not saying Queen 6 is a hand that should be played, but it's more interesting than folding, and you're probably not watching my vlog to watch me play Super Nitty Poker. In this next hand, I have Ace King offsuit under the gun. That's a real hand. I raise to 20 from under the gun. The hijack 3-bets me to 60. This is the same guy that raised last hand, not the guy with the kings. He didn't raise, the other guy. And he's got a huge stack and looks like he wants to push chips around. So I consider 4-betting here. A lot of times I will 4-bet Ace King, but we're both pretty deep at this point. He's got a stack that's similar to mine. I have about 1450, I think, at this point. And I don't want to 4-bet and then get shoved off my hand by a 5-bet. And I just feel like with me raising him 3-betting, I guess I'm out of position. Maybe that means I should 4-bet, but I feel like I want to see a flop rather than go too crazy here. So I just call this time. The flop is 2 of clubs, ace of spades, 6 of spades. So that's a pretty great flop for me. I checked to him since he was the 3-better, and I feel like that's got to have hit me more than him, unless he's like the other guy going crazy with pocket sixes, but I just don't think so. He bets 60, and I just call. I think I'm probably way ahead here, and at worst, he could have ace-king, but it seems unlikely, and even so, that's not the worst case scenario for me. I don't think raising makes a ton of sense here. There's no real draws other than spades. I don't expect him to ever have 3-4 or 4-5 for a gut shot straight draw here. So I'm not really too worried about turn cards, and I want to let him keep betting because I feel like I have to have the best hand. So I just call. The turn pairs the board. It's the 6 of hearts. That seems like a pretty great card for me also. Again, I don't expect him to have any sixes, so now I have 2 pair with the king kicker. Seems pretty good to me. I check again, and this time he checks behind. So I figure he probably doesn't have any ace. I think ace-queen probably bets again, but not 100% sure on that, I guess. But most likely, I think ace-queen would bet again. So I put him on, something like jacks or queens, tens, I don't know, not an ace. The river is the ace of diamonds, so that's good and bad because obviously I make the non-quad sixes nuts, but now I'm chopping with anything like ace queen or ace jack. So if he was just being cautious with one of those hands on the turn, now we chop instead of me winning. So I don't really feel like that card is great for me, other than if he doesn't have an ace, which I don't think he does. He might be more willing to pay off an ace now because there's 2 of them, which makes it less likely that I have one. Because I'm pretty sure he doesn't have an ace, I don't think betting is the right play here. I guess I could bet, and maybe queens or kings might give me a crying call if I make a smallish bet. I don't think this is a polarizing kind of bet spot. I think if I were going to bet, I'd want to bet something small like 100 or 120 and see if I get called. But like I said, this guy's been playing pretty aggressive. He's got a big stack and he's been pushing it around. So I think a check is the best decision here. I don't normally love checking big hands. I like to bet hands and hope I get called. But this particular player, I feel like checking to him, he probably is going to make another bet. After I check the flop, the turn, and the river, I don't think he's going to probably give me credit for an ace, and I think he's going to probably want to try to scare me off of the hand. So I do check to him, hoping that he will take a bluff at it. And if he's got something like queens or kings, then I could potentially lose value because he's just going to check back a hand with showdown value. But I get the impression if I check to him after checking the turn, he's going to bet the river. And he bets 110. So my plan works out great. Obviously now I have to raise because there's no reason not to. So I raised to 320, which is a big raise, but I don't know that the raise size matters too much here. I think any raise on the river basically is me showing my hand face up, but at the same time, I of course have to raise. He pretty much snap folds and looks pretty disgusted about it. So I think he realizes that I checked to him, gave him a little bit of rope, and I tricked him into betting this hand. So I actually felt like I played this one pretty good. And yeah, I was pretty happy with the way I checked the flop, turn, and river and gave him a chance to keep bluffing at a hand where I was just crushing it. Here I have pocket fives and the cutoff. We've been playing pretty short-handed. I think we're 5-handed at this time. I raised to 20 and only the big blind calls. The flop is 6, 6, 10 with 2 spades. Obviously a 6 and a 10. That seems like a pretty decent flop for fives. The big blind leads at me for 20, and I think fives are probably still good here, so I call. The turn is the 4 of diamonds. He checks to me, and I feel like fives are probably still good. They were good on the flop, they're probably still good, and I thought they were good. So I bet 50. I don't want to give over cards a chance to get a free river card, and he calls. The river is the ace of clubs. That's a pretty terrible card. It's not a spade, but it seems pretty bad. Although I don't know how many hands with an ace are calling the turn. He checks, and I'm happy to check behind on this one with showdown value. And he actually shows pocket threes. So he had a very similar hand to mine, but pocket fives are good here, and I win this one. Between the pocket fives hand and this next hand, I think I lose about 150 playing some hands like 10-jack suited, which I raise and c-bet and miss, or miss straight draws and lose. That's the thing about playing short-handed, is that you do have to open up your game and range a bit and defend more, otherwise you can just get run over folding everything. And if you're getting playable hands but missing on all of them, well, that can just be costly. So at this time I'm losing a little bit. It's a bit of a roller coaster ride in this short-handed game in which there's a lot of people playing aggressively and pushing money around, but it still seems like a good game to me. It's just going to be dependent on whether I can hit some hands or whether other people are going to hit hands against me. In this hand I have King 10 offsuit in the cutoff. The hijack raises to 15, I call 15, and the big blind calls 15. The flop is 4 of hearts, 2 of hearts, jack of clubs, and it gets checked around. The turn is the queen of clubs, giving me an open-ender with 1 over. It gets checked to me, and I bet 30. Seems like nobody's too interested in this pot, and my hand's pretty good. I have an open-ender, and I have an over. The big blind calls, and everybody else folds. The river is a brick, and it gets checked to me again. I could just check back here and give up, but I do bet 60 to try to see if I can take this pot, in case the big blind was calling with something like a heart draw or a club draw, both of which miss on the river. He calls with ace-jack for a flop top pair, and ended up being second pair, and he wins this one. He did check 3 times in a row, which made me think it was worth a stab. Obviously, I did that the other hand with the ace-king, but ace-jack's not really that strong of a hand, and with all the flush draws missing, it seemed to me like it was worth a shot, but didn't work this time. Over time I'm trending a bit downward here, but I get pocket 10s in the hijack. The under the gun player raises to 15. I do 3-bet here to 60, and he calls. The flop is just about terrible. It's the ace of spades, jack of clubs, ace of diamonds. I guess the only good thing you could say about that is that there's 2 aces out there instead of just 1. It is terrible for my actual hand, but it seems pretty good for my range of hands. So he checks to me, and I don't want to check back here. I'd rather continue betting my position and my 3-bet pre-flop range. So I bet 40, and luckily he folds this one. In this next one I have pocket queens under the gun, and I raise to 20. The low jack, who is a player I've played with at Bellagio many a time and is a good player, 3-bets me to 75, and I'm not really sure what to do here. I think I have to 4-bet queens, and then at that point I have to see what he does, but I like to think in advance. If I'm going to raise a 3-bet and then I get 5-bet, I'm trying to figure out what I potentially would do in that situation before I 4-bet, because you want to think a couple moves ahead, kind of like chess if possible. I'm thinking if he 5-bet jams on me, because he has a big stack also, I might consider folding queens to this player, because the worst hand he could probably jam on me with is ace-king, and I don't even know that this player would do that. So if he 5-bet jams on me, I potentially could fold. And hopefully he's not watching this vlog and knowing that, because then maybe he'll do that, 5-bet jam me in the future expecting me to fold. But when I 4-bet, I also could very easily have aces or kings here, so it's not like a great bluff spot against me, because while I'm trying to open up my 3 and 4-bet range, it's not very often I'm 4-betting without a pretty big hand. So I do 4-bet here to 220. He tanks for a while and folds, and I win this one. Obviously, queens end up being the best hand here. In this next one, the strong hands continue, as I have pocket kings in the cutoff. The under the gun player limps. I raise to 25, and he calls. The flop is terrible. It's ace of spades, 6 of spades, 4 of spades. I have no spades. So that's about the worst flop you could possibly see. Not a big fan. He checks to me, I continuation bet for 25, and he raises me to 145. Yeah. That could be a bluff. A lot of people like to semi-bluff here with some sort of spade draw, but I've invested $50 in the pot, even though it sucks to fold pocket kings. Boards don't get really any worse for my hand, so I fold, and he shows me pocket fives with the 5 of spades. So obviously I was ahead. He did have any spade to make a flush. I don't really think calling with kings is smart, even though clearly I was ahead. For the last hand of the vlog, we're still playing short-handed. I'm in the big blind with 7-8 offsuit. It gets folded to the button, who is a drunk kid who's here on his bachelor party, and he hasn't been playing terribly, but he's made some hero calls that were good and some hero calls that were not good. And we're playing so short-handed, the button's raising light a lot of the times, and this guy especially has been raising a lot, so everyone else folds, and I call. We're heads up, and the flop is 9 of spades, 5 of spades, 10 of hearts. So that's pretty good for me. I'm open-ended. We both check. The turn is a pretty good bingo card. It's the Jack of Hearts, giving me the straight. Of course, I'm behind Queen King and 8 Queen, although I'm not really worried about 8 Queen. Some people could raise 8 Queen suited. I suppose I'm one of those people. On a button, I might do that short-handed, but regardless, I'm not going to be too worried about those two hands at this time. I bet 25, and he min-raises me to 50. And the thing to know about this kid is, even though he's been making a lot of calls with medium hands, he hasn't been doing any raising. So the alarm bells are going off here when he min-raises me, which he has not done the entire night that he's been at our table. So I consider re-raising right now, but it doesn't feel right to me. It just feels like I should be scared. And because of that, I just smooth call instead of raising. I want to see what comes on the river before I commit a large chunk of money to this hand. The river is the 5 of diamonds, which pairs the board. That's about the worst card, I think. I don't expect him to have something like 9-5 or 10-5 or Jack-5, but obviously my straight gets downgraded quite a bit when the board pairs. In case he has any of those hands, or pocket 9s or pocket 10s, something like that. Obviously I'm behind full houses now. I hate it, actually. I hate this card. So I actually check to him with the straight, and he bets 100. I don't think I can ever fold my straight here for 100, but I don't love it. I consider raising, and again, alarm bells are going off. I don't think I can get called by anything worse than my hand if I raise, and I'm really concerned that he's either got a better straight or a full house. It's just, in my intuition, I feel like I'm beat here, even though I don't know exactly what hand he has. It's an interesting spot where I can feel that I'm beat, even though I don't know how I'm beat, if that makes any sense. So I still can't fold for 100, so I just call, and he shows Jack-5 suited. So he flop bottom pair, turn top and bottom pair, and river to full house. I feel like I lose the absolute minimum in this hand, I'm not going to lie to you. So I guess if I raise on the turn, technically I was very much ahead, but he's not folding 2 pair, and I just lose a bunch of money. I end up losing this one, and I cash out for only $12.37. I was up to something like $1,600 at one point. I was in for $900, so it ends up being a win of $347 after a bit of a roller coaster ride. After being down, it's nice to cash out up $347. I was up something like $700 or $800 at one point, so it feels good to win. It feels good to come back from being down quite a bit of money, and then it feels shitty to be up 800 and then lose about 400 of it back. But there were some tough hands in there, and nice to come away with a win. All right. Want to thank everybody for watching the vlog. Again, if you're enjoying them, please like and subscribe. Also, send me comments if you'd like. I try to respond to pretty much all of those when I can. And I appreciate you checking out the vlog, and hopefully we'll see you next time.